We live in an age where belief is cheap. Everyone believes something, and when it comes to faith, especially in the West, we've equated belief in Jesus with obedience to him. We've confused agreeing with a set of theological ideas with living a crucified life. But Scripture doesn't let us get away with that. Jesus never once said, "Believe in me and stay the same." He said, "Follow me." That's not a suggestion, that's a summons. And yet, if you were to walk into most churches today, you'd find people who believe Jesus is real, who acknowledge his death and resurrection, who might even be emotionally moved by worship and sermons, but whose lives bear no resemblance to the one they claim to follow. Why? Because they've been sold a version of Christianity that is low, risk low, cost and low commitment, a faith that doesn't demand anything beyond mental assent, a Jesus who saves but doesn't rule. A cross that's symbolic but never carried, but Jesus didn't call for fans, he called for followers, and there is a difference. Following requires movement. It demands discipline, obedience, sacrifice. It means your lifestyle, values, relationships, time, and even your inner thought life start to look more like his. Not out of religious duty, but because you've been transformed, and transformation leaves evidence. This message isn't about legalism, it's not about earning salvation, it's about examining whether what we call faith is anything more than convenience wrapped in religious language, because Jesus said, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me." That's not a casual belief. That's a costly pursuit. So the real question we're asking today isn't, do you believe in Jesus? Because many will say they do. The question is, are you following him? Because on the last day, Jesus will not say, "Well believed, good and faithful servant." He'll say, "Well done." And only those who followed, not just agreed, will hear those words. Most people today have no trouble believing in something. Belief has become a kind of cultural currency. We believe in causes, in ourselves, in stories that make us feel secure. So when someone says they believe in Jesus, we instinctively translate that to mean they're a Christian, but that's an assumption and a dangerous one, because belief in the modern sense often stops at intellectual agreement. It's assent without allegiance, and that's not what Jesus was asking for. You can believe something is true without it ever transforming your life. I can believe a bridge will hold my weight, but if I never step onto it, my belief is irrelevant. It's theoretical. In the same way, you can say you believe Jesus is the Son of God, that he died and rose again, and even quote Scripture. But if your life doesn't reflect a pattern of daily surrender, then the belief you claim hasn't taken root deep enough to produce obedience. And that's the dividing line. Jesus never called people to simply believe ideas about him. He called them to follow him. That's action, that's movement, that's costly. When he walked up to the fishermen, he didn't say, "Do you believe I exist?" He said, "Follow me." That meant dropping their nets, their careers, their plans, their identities. And stepping into the unknown, it cost them something. It still does. There's a tendency in modern culture to sentimentalize Jesus. We like the parts about love, grace, and forgiveness, but we're uneasy with the parts about death to self, about obedience, about picking up a cross. And yet, that's the invitation, not to merely admire Christ, but to imitate him. That's the difference between belief and discipleship. One requires only that you agree, the other demands that you become. From a psychological perspective, the human mind is capable of holding ideas that never penetrate our behavior. We can say one thing and do another because beliefs that aren't connected to action remain compartmentalized. They don't challenge us, they comfort us. And unfortunately, many churches have reinforced this pattern by presenting salvation as a transaction. Pray a prayer, believe the right things, and you're in. But that's not how transformation works. Real discipleship rewires your habits, confronts your ego, and forces you to die to parts of yourself that you once protected at all costs. Following Jesus isn't just believing in him, it's trusting him enough to become like him. It means living in a way that interrupts your convenience, that reorders your priorities, that places truth above comfort. It means saying no to your own will, even when it hurts, and yes to his, even when it costs you everything. So if belief is the first step, following is the journey, and only those who walk the road will ever understand what it means to truly love. Don't settle for belief that doesn't break the surface. Let your faith walk where your words claim to stand. It's surprisingly easy to say the right words while living the wrong life. We live in a time where verbal expression is often mistaken for moral alignment. People imagine that because they say they're Christians, because they go to church, post Scripture, or claim to put God first, that they are automatically on the narrow path. But that isn't what Jesus taught. In fact, he directly warned against it. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. That wasn't spoken to atheists or pagans. It was spoken to the religious elite, the ones who believed they were already in. Confession is important. The Bible is clear. We are to confess with our mouths that Jesus is Lord. But that verse doesn't stop there. It adds, and believe in your heart, not merely an intellectual agreement, but a transformative soul, deep conviction that leads to submission. The problem is that confession, without genuine commitment, can actually become a form of self-deception. It soothes the conscience without transforming the character, and this is where the danger lies. When someone confesses Christ without committing to his way of life, they build a framework of faith that lacks foundation. It looks strong on the outside. It has the language, the rituals, the appearance. But beneath the surface, it's hollow. It's like a beautifully painted house built on sand. When hardship, temptation, or conviction comes, it crumbles, not because it wasn't religious, but because it wasn't rooted. Psychologically, this is a familiar pattern. Humans are wired to seek coherence between what we say and what we do. But when that coherence breaks, when we speak one way and live another, we create a split within ourselves. That split, if unaddressed, leads to either hypocrisy or collapse. We either harden into performance, pretending everything is fine while silently drifting from truth, or we abandon the faith altogether, concluding that it never worked in the first place. But the issue was never Christ. It was that we tried to adopt his name without surrendering to his lordship. Following Jesus isn't about perfect obedience. It's about sincere obedience. The question isn't whether you struggle, it's whether you're fighting. Whether your heart is actually bowed, not just your words. That's what separates genuine discipleship from cultural Christianity. One takes up a cross, the other wears one around their neck, and God isn't fooled by our performances. He doesn't weigh our faith by volume, but by depth, by fruit, by the invisible choices that nobody sees, the ones that reveal whether we're truly following or merely professing. So ask yourself honestly, am I using spiritual language to mask spiritual apathy? Am I saying Jesus is Lord while refusing to let him lead, because at the end of your life it won't matter what you confessed if it wasn't confirmed by the life you lived? Let your confession be more than noise. Let it be an echo of a life fully surrendered. It's one thing to believe in Jesus quietly, privately, when there's no cost, no pressure, no resistance, but following him, that's something entirely different. That takes courage, not just physical courage in the face of persecution, though that still happens in many parts of the world. I'm talking about moral courage, the kind that forces you to confront your own patterns, to stand against cultural trends, and sometimes to walk away from people you love because your values are no longer compatible. That's where the line is drawn. Belief is passive. Following requires confrontation, first with yourself and then with the world around you. We're living in a time where Christianity has been reduced to a label, an aesthetic, or worse, a tribal identity. For many, being a Christian is about belonging to a social group or signaling a particular moral code. But real discipleship isn't performative, it's disruptive. It cuts through complacency. And the moment you choose to truly follow Christ, His teachings, His priorities, His standards, you'll find yourself walking in conflict with the broader culture, even with parts of the church that have traded truth for comfort. Jesus Himself said, "Do not think I came to bring peace but a sword." That statement is jarring if you only know the soft, sanitized version of Christianity, but Jesus wasn't interested in false peace. He came to divide what is true from what is convenient, what is holy from what is popular. And when you align your life with that kind of truth, you will inevitably clash with systems that run on deception, compromise, and ego. From a psychological lens, this is where real identity is forged. Not when you're affirmed, but when you're tested. The willingness to stand alone, to say no when everyone else is saying yes. That's the sign of someone who has internalized their values deeply. It means you're not just reacting to the world, you're anchored in something unshakable, and that kind of moral courage is rare because it's costly. It will cost you relationships. It will cost you opportunities. But it will also liberate you because once you stop needing the approval of others, you start living from a place of wholeness, not fear. This is the road Jesus walked, not one of applause, but of rejection, not one of safety, but of sacrifice. And He didn't just walk it so we could admire Him from a distance. He walked it to call us into it, to show us that the path to life always runs through discomfort, obedience, and often suffering. Not because God enjoys our pain, but because He's after something deeper than comfort, our transformation. So ask yourself, am I following Jesus only where it's easy, or am I willing to walk with Him when the path demands everything I have? The world doesn't need more believers, it needs more disciples, people who follow Christ not just in word, but in costly, courageous action. There's a common misconception in Western Christianity that following Jesus is a one-time decision, a checkbox you tick, a prayer you say once with sincerity, and then move on with your life relatively unchanged. But that couldn't be further from the truth Christ actually taught. When Jesus said, "Take up your cross daily and follow me," He didn't mean sign up for a belief system. He meant enter into a lifestyle of disciplined surrender every single day. And that's the problem. We've glamorized belief and abandoned discipleship. The modern church often makes salvation feel like a spiritual transaction, quick, convenient, low cost, but the truth is, transformation doesn't happen in a moment. It happens in the day-to-day grind of dying to yourself, of denying your impulses, your comforts, your self-centered ambitions. That's not a one-time prayer. That's a daily crucifixion. Think of the psychology of habits. Lasting change doesn't come from big emotional moments. It comes from consistency. You don't become generous because you gave once. You become generous by choosing to give when it hurts over time. You don't become forgiving by saying the word. You become forgiving when you're wronged again and again, and you choose to release bitterness instead of nursing it. Real discipleship works exactly the same way. It reshapes your instincts, not just your intentions, and that reshaping is painful. The cross was not symbolic to the early disciples. It was a literal instrument of death. When Jesus used that image, He was communicating something brutal and raw. To follow me, you must be willing to die, not just physically, but egoically, emotionally, socially. That means letting your pride be crucified, letting your convenience be crucified, letting your entitlement, your comfort, your need to be right, die. But this is precisely where real freedom begins. When you die to the parts of yourself that are enslaved to validation, fear, and comfort, you begin to live from a deeper place. That's the paradox of the gospel. The death of self is not destruction, it's liberation. It's the cutting away of what was false so that what's true can finally breathe. But that kind of transformation doesn't come passively. It comes through daily obedience, through showing up again and again when you don't feel like it, when no one is watching, when the cost is high and the reward feels far off. Jesus never promised the path would be easy. He promised it would be narrow, and yet it's the only path that leads to life. So if you think you're following Christ because you made a decision once, ask yourself, are you still making that decision daily? Discipleship is not a moment, it's a rhythm, and only those willing to die daily will ever truly know what it means to live.